Sophie Hardy and the Internet Implant by Emma Dale. Narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 10. Releasing a Statement. Sat round in his office, Alton King had reached the end of his tether. The room contained nothing except a desk and chair. The desk had one fat black leg at the front which arched inwards, and the top was glass. On top of that there was nothing. King was sat deep in thought, but not the sort of thought that inspired him to create or invent. He was stressed, and if he wasn't careful, the next thing he said to the press could ruin him and his company that he'd worked from scratch to build, and that to him would be worse than the end of the world. It was clear to him as well now that the implant, which had been invented by a small group of very clever scientists in that very office right there in Shadow HQ, was the main factor in all its users fainting at once, but if he told the press that, it would cause a mass panic. Everyone had one. Rich, poor, famous, insignificant, almost every person in the developed world had one. They had become part of everyday life, and people relied on them for everything, including news. You could be placed in an augmented reality and stand face to face with a news reporter on the scene. Films. You were now totally immersed into a film. It was like having a 360-degree view of everything going on around you. Something as simple as selecting music to listen to or changing television channel was now all done in mind. Bus travel and even toilet visits were now dominated by people using their implant. People were never bored. They were totally immersed. It was about as far away from the olden days of terrifying creatures as you could get, and Alton King had made that happen. When the blackout occurred, he had been studying lines of code in the system from the moment when Sophie fainted the first time, just trying to see what had happened. When the second, infinitely larger fainting had taken place, King had been sat at his desk looking at a real-time feed of what was happening underneath the surface of the implant's huge storage database, which was stored at its facility, Stratus, examining code. Stratus Tower had been built in the centre of London and was home to everything that the internet needed to function. The hub that emitted the signal for everyone to use and feed off in their quest to stay online, its signal and servers. The Shadow HQ, however, was King's normal base of operations and main home to everything internet related, but it was Stratus that served as the beating heart of the internet experience and would act as a backup if anything was ever to go wrong at Shadow HQ. King, too, had passed out, and when he awoke 60 seconds later, he noticed something within the code. Lines of numbers that shouldn't have been there. They were words written in old binary, where letters were replaced by numbers. He had studied them carefully for a minute and translated them. "Get me out now," read the message. King instantly knew who it was and exactly who to get in contact with to help. It then occurred to him that although he knew who he needed, he had no way of getting in touch with them as they never opened their messages. One thing he definitely knew for sure and could deal with now was that he had to delete the code before anyone else saw it. He did so without giving it a second thought. This was the decision he was faced with. Keep quiet and hope everything went away, or tell someone and risk losing everything. The world saw him as a genius and a visionary. He didn't want that to change. He was a genius. He was a visionary. He had changed the world and he didn't want that taking away from him. His company was his livelihood and everything he had. This wasn't a decision to be taken lightly. He was given 10 minutes of thinking time before his alert flashed on his implant. Outside the offices were some reporters. There hadn't been any around him for years. They tended to leave him alone as they knew he was responsible for all the advancements of the human race, and he never seemed to leave his offices, so he couldn't be doing anything exciting or worthy of reporting on. The messages said they wanted to know if he had anything to add to the quickly spreading rumours that the implant users had fainted at the same time and that the fault of the implant or hub in Stratus was to blame. He had never faced a crisis like this before. He wasn't sure what to do. He ignored the alert about the reporters, and in the meantime more and more arrived. Half an hour later, and with the press now really hankering after an interview they were promised 20 minutes ago, he had a plan. Lie. The code doesn't exist anymore, he thought to himself. Why should anyone know any different? This invention is too important to mankind now to throw it all away because of one glitch. After convincing himself he was doing the right thing, he opened his office door and walked towards the main entrance where the press were waiting outside at the bottom of the steps. With some notes in his hand, he stood at the top of the stairs, shuffling his papers, and started telling the world it wasn't down to him or his invention. Sat at home, Sophie and Yasmin watched King on the news, still pondering over Tom's efforts to convince them he knew what was going on. Throughout the whole shambles, they knew he was lying. 3 people had fainted on that school field, and all 3 of them had had something to do with an II just the day before. Sophie's mind was going into overdrive. "He's lying," she said, rubbing her eye. "How do you know?" Amelia's voice came from the kitchen. Just a feeling," Sophie mumbled, not realising that her mum could hear her. "Yes, he is," Yasmin added. "What are you doing with your face?" she asked, noticing Sophie was still rubbing her eye. "Nothing, I'm fine," Sophie lied. "But what do we do about it?" Yasmin asked. "There's only us 2, unless you count Miss Sissons, and I don't trust her right now." "I'm not sure that she can't be trusted either. Maybe we talk to her if we can't think of anyone else," Sophie replied. "What about Reuben? We don't know what he saw, or if he saw anything at all." A thought struck Yasmin. What about Mr. Houghton? If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here. He put us in that competition. He picked out the children. Why pick you and me, 2 girls from year 6, in the first 3 people? That doesn't seem right. You think it'd be more spread across school. "We need to ask him for more information about this competition he entered us in," Sophie agreed. "We can ask him tomorrow." Yasmin sat back and folded her arms with rather smug look on her face. "This is like being a detective," she said excitedly. After a few seconds of silence, Sophie also told her about Clara's second appearance. Yasmin said that she remembered nothing but blackness when she'd passed out. Clara clearly wanted to talk to Sophie and nobody else, or so Sophie thought. The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by Emma Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a hard copy of the book, then be sure to check out www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.